Hi guys, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for being patient, waiting for this video. I had to connect a lot of dots. I had to do a lot of research, and it just kind of came out that there was too much information to pack into this thing. So in some aspects, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. There are some things I'm going to mention in this video that I've already gone into detail in previous videos, and there might be some things that I'll do in subsequent videos. So this is going to be I'm going to just try to connect all the dots for you as to what I think really went on with that explosion in Beirut. What is the truth? So let's go ahead and get started on this. Now, I am going to assert that the explosion in Beirut was an act of sabotage, and that the act of sabotage was not for the reasons you might think. Now, many think it was Israel trying to secure its interests, and they might have helped. They might have even been the ones to pull it off, because they do have something to gain in trying to limit Iran and Hezbollah's influence in the country, but their interests were not the primary reason. Instead, the act of sabotage was an attempt to stop Chinese expansion. In fact, I'm also changing my mind about the mysterious numerous acts of sabotage that have been happening in Iran. I did a video saying that all of the numerous fires and explosions that have been going on throughout Iran's various different military installations, ships, ports, nuclear facilities, oil and gas pipelines. I thought that it was Israel trying to bait Iran into war in order to destabilize them and gain influence in the region. And again, they might be the ones pulling it off or helping, but I no longer think their interests are the primary focus. Instead, I think the primary reason Iran has been under attack has been to stop Chinese expansion. All roads lead to China. At least the Belt and Road Initiative does. China unveiled in 2013 its plans to revive their ancient Silk Road. Their vision is to connect a land and sea route around South Asia into Africa, up the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, into the Middle East, and onward into Europe. From there, the land route would go through Europe, into Russia, down through Eastern Europe, into the Middle East, through Iran and Central Asia, back into China. There's another smaller trade route that's being developed and was announced between China and Pakistan that goes through Pakistan-controlled Kashmir. So why do I think the recent smaller explosions in Iran and the massive one in Beirut are to stop Chinese expansion? Well, it's not the only area this sort of sabotage is happening, and I'm going to get into that. We're going to connect all the dots. But China has been a rising nation for the past 20 or so years. Everyone has expected China would rise to become a world power. The thing is, they have been rising much faster than anyone anticipated. I think the advent of technology mixed with them being an authoritative nation that doesn't deal with one of the downfalls of democracy, which is needing to gain consensus and going through some red tape in order to make decisions. So because they've been able to avoid that, they've been able to rapidly advance. So then in 2013, when they announced their Belt and Road Initiative, it became clear they were on the fast track to world dominance. And this was very scary for the U.S. and the West in general. And historically, rather than aggressively compete, the strategy has been to kneecap the competition. The U.S. and the West in general really waged a 50-year Cold War against the USSR to stop Soviet expansion. It was the number one focus of U.S. foreign policy from the 40s to the 90s. The U.S. waged numerous proxy wars and allowed thousands upon thousands of U.S. soldiers' lives to be lost and many more foreign lives lost in an effort to stop Soviet expansion. And the thinking was, if the Soviets expanded their influence around the world, they would become the world power and we would be at their mercy. So we did everything we could to stop their expansion, including wage proxy wars in Vietnam, Korea, Afghanistan, Iran, Malaysia, Algeria, all throughout Central America, Congo, Cuba, etc. We went all around the world trying to stop the Soviets. Now that China has become an increasing threat, it's looking like we might be using the same tactics. So let's go ahead and start with Lebanon, Beirut, and work our way backwards. Now, last week, an explosion of nearly 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate leveled the port in Beirut, killing around 200 people, injuring thousands more, and leaving even more homeless. It was discovered that the ammonium nitrate was taken from a ship and had been sitting at the port for nearly 6 years. Now, ammonium nitrate doesn't spontaneously combust. It has to be ignited. So the question is, what was the spark? So there are speculations that it was a fire that was started by sparks during welding that was happening nearby. They're investigating this. They're trying to figure out what it was. Or that it was a fire that was lit off by fireworks that was being stored nearby. So the fire lit off the fireworks. The fireworks sparked the ammonium nitrate, which caused the big, huge blast. In an interview with the Associated Press, an Israeli explosive expert who works closely with the Israeli government said it looked like cheap fireworks made in China that sparked the explosion. Over the past several months, numerous reports have been coming out saying the Chinese government was striking a deal to add Lebanon to its Belt and Road Initiative. That China had been trying to land Beirut for years because the Middle Eastern port would be an incredibly strategic location for the trade route. The port would allow China to then create a direct rail link from Beirut to Damascus, through Iraq, and into Iran and onward. So the port in Beirut is incredibly strategically important to the Chinese initiative. They need that port. They also need the Lebanese government to be friendly. So if the Lebanese people think it was cheap Chinese fireworks that caused the explosion, they're a lot less likely to be welcoming of Chinese imports. Plus, with the calls for a revolution, the prime minister stepping down after the blast, we can assume the deal with China was that they were in the process of making now is probably on hold at best. So there will be a full court press attempt, I'm sure, by Western and Israeli leadership to get Western and Israeli friendly leadership in power in Lebanon. Israel immediately rushed to the country's aid, likely to try to gain influence within the new government. But so is China. So we're going to see how this all plays out. Now, China would have to rebuild that port. Their very strategic, important port. They would have to spend now an unknown amount of money, billions of dollars, to rebuild something that they otherwise would not have had to invest in. So this was a real way to really stick it to China. So if I had to bet, I would say that Israel's Mossad, alongside the CIA, lit off those Chinese fireworks that caused the explosion. And Israel definitely has something to gain, but it was mostly to stop Chinese from gaining that incredibly important foothold in the Middle East. So this takes us to Iran. Now, Iran has seen a series of mysterious explosions and fires targeting their military installations, nuclear power sites, gas pipelines, medical facilities, ships and ports, and industrial manufacturing facilities throughout their country. Now, at first, it looked like Israel was attempting to bait Iran into war, but, Iran never falls for these antics, and the tactics were somewhat odd. There have been many of them since June, dozens, in fact, and the targets have been all over the board in regards to types of facilities. It's odd until you examine the deal that Iran and China just struck and announced in mid-July. China has agreed to invest $400 billion in phase one in Iran to help build up its infrastructure, specifically in its energy sectors of power, oil and gas, and investments in transportation and manufacturing sectors. The deal also has a military cooperation component. So basically, it encompasses all the types of facilities that have mysteriously exploded or gone up in flames in Iran. And knowing these facilities that have mysteriously exploded or caught on fire in both Iran and Lebanon are the very facilities Beijing is interested in for their Belt and Road Initiative leads me to believe it's much more than just a coincidence, but an act of intentional sabotage in an effort to halt Chinese expansion. The Middle East isn't the only target to halt China's initiative. When we look at the map of the Belt and Road Initiative, you can see that it's not much of a belt nor a road unless China can get out of China. It needs to travel through Southeast Asia on the water route, and it needs to travel through Central Asia for the land route. So China announced their plans in 2013, and yet, interestingly enough, when you look through Southeast Asia, there's been an alarming rise of Islamist activity and terrorist attacks throughout Southeast Asia since 2015. Now, this is one of our age-old tricks against the Soviets. We armed, promote, and stuck Islamist extremists right at their border in order to keep them busy fighting terrorists. China's Belt and Road goes right into Southeast Asia, into Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, and Burma, right where there's been a serious uptick in Islamist movements. Along the land route, China needs to get out of its own nation by crossing through the Xinjiang region, where many of you heard about the Uyghur issue. What's less commonly known is China claims their beef with the Uyghurs isn't their Muslim religion. They have other areas in China that are Muslim majority where they're not having any problems. China's beef is specifically a separatist movement that has gained ground within the Uyghurs to create what's called East Turkestan. Now, interestingly, the government in exile of East Turkestan is headquartered in none other than Washington, D.C. The separatist movement is fairly new. It first started in the early 2000s, like many Islamist uprisings, and it's been able to gain ground year after year. Now, it is a very conservative, fundamentalist movement that seeks to create a nation similar to the Taliban in Afghanistan. I did an entire segment explaining in detail the Uyghur issue, so I'm not going to go into it fully here. So I'd encourage you to watch that video. But I will say that the only nations against China's methods of attempting to squash this fundamentalist movement are Western nations. So we're the ones that have been calling them out, saying this is concentration camps, this is genocide, these are human rights abuses. Interestingly, most of the Muslim majority nations, including Saudi Arabia, who is largely responsible for the rise of this ideology to begin with, as well as Egypt, Yemen, the Emirates, Morocco, Algeria, and about 40 other countries, have actually made statements supporting China in what they're calling their anti-terrorism strategy. And it's increasingly looking like the West is attempting to justify supporting another extremist group in order to create chaos and war for China in order to limit their influence. It is the exact same strategy we used against the Soviets when we armed and trained the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. The rhetoric was the people want freedom and autonomy, and in reality, we were helping usher in the Taliban and creating a world where moderate Muslims were forced to live under ultra-conservative rule. So if we can get a civil war brewing in the western region of China, there's no way they can effectively build their Belt and Road. It would put a dead stop to their ambitions for a while. And what's interesting is what's happening between Pakistan, India, and China. Isn't it odd that our ally in India abruptly ended Kashmir's autonomy right when China was making a deal with Pakistan to build a route right through Pakistan-controlled Kashmir? Now there's unrest, and the region may even break out in war. Isn't it also odd that Hong Kong, another port and major strategic partner, is going through massive unrest? And here we have a president who's hell-bent on calling the virus the China flu, who has been all about China, China, China. He might not be inclined to march us into full-on conflicts like some of his predecessors, but he sure seems to be a fan of covert efforts of sabotage and overt efforts to pressure. And it's looking to me like, when we connect all these dots, that we are already well underway on our second Cold War. I'm sure it didn't start with Trump. I'm sure it's been building administration after administration, and it will only intensify as the years go on, just like the Cold War with the USSR did. Ideally, we don't end up in the same terrifying situation of worrying about whether or not we're going to be nuked by China at any given moment. But quite frankly, if we keep up these antics, we will be. The thing for us American citizens to do is keep our eyes open to this new Cold War and pressure our government to find different ways to compete on the world stage. We need to invest in the education and health of the American people so that we are smarter and stronger than our competition. And we need to form friendly partnerships around the world rather than bullying or ignoring. We need to be very aware of increasing Chinese influence in our nation. I did a whole video on that as well that I would encourage you to watch that goes through exactly the threat that China poses, what the U.S. can do. We do need to adopt an America First attitude, and we do need to become a bit more protectionist. So definitely watch that video as well. And we need to be aware of China's influence in our nation. We need to start making some regulations to protect ourselves. Also, the tactic of demonizing anyone we don't agree with should also be re-examined. We see it now in our everyday lives amongst cancel culture, but it first started with America refusing to do deals or make partnerships with nations we don't morally agree with. And like cancel culture, it's often hypocritical as we alienate some nations yet continue to buddy up with others, such as Saudi Arabia, for example. So we need to be friendlier with other nations around the world the same way China's been. We need to understand that they don't need to be westernized or democratized in order for us to do deals with them. That's what China's doing all throughout Africa, all throughout Southeast Asia, all throughout Central Europe, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and it's working. they're also going into Latin America, and that is a whole nother video that's not totally in conjunction with their Belt and Road, but they are certainly making inroads throughout Latin America and South America. And that is another one that shows we are trying to limit Chinese expansion. They've been doing deals with Venezuela. It's all very interesting. I'm going to connect more of these dots as time goes on. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this sort of opened your eyes and made you think about something a little bit differently today. I appreciate your support. If you want to support this channel, again, you can subscribe to my Rockfin channel. You can also subscribe to become a patron, or you can donate directly through PayPal. The links are down below. Thank you so much for watching.